Why UFOs? Operation Trojan Horse? John A. Keel. There is no plot to cover up the truth, but a sensible decision made by men whose minds have been boggled by just a glimpse of the overwhelming reality they encountered in their search for evidence to prove or disprove the evidence of UFOs. We are now at Chapter 10. What is your time cycle? In November 1966, two women were standing in a field outside of Wautatona, Minnesota, watching a familiar sight, what they call little flashers, bright blinking lights that dance around the sky almost every night. Suddenly, one of the objects descended rapidly and hovered at the far end of the field where they stood, swinging back and forth a few feet above the ground. Colored lights flickered around its glowing rim. One of the women let out a little gasp and crumpled to her knees in a trance-like daze. Her friend, Mrs. Ralph Butler, Mr. Yeah, it is Mrs. Ralph Butler. That's interesting. Reached for her, but she was immobile. Her head dipped down. A strange voice, still and metallic, came spasmodically from her lips. "What is your time cycle?" the voice asked. Mrs. Butler recovered from her surprise and tried to explain how we measured minutes, hours, and days. "What constitutes a day and what constitutes a night?" the voice continued. "A day is approximately 12 hours long. A night is 12 hours long," Mrs. Butler replied. There were a few more innocuous questions, and then the other woman came out of her trance. "Boy, I'm glad that's over," she remarked simply. The object shot upward, believing that they had communicated with a flying saucer through some incredible telepathic means. Both women were naturally excited, but later, when they tried to discuss the incident with others, they found that they suddenly came down with blinding headaches. Mrs. Butler wrote to me after reading one of my magazine articles. I immediately called her and spoke to her for almost an hour. "It's strange," she declared, "but this is the first time I've ever been able to talk about these things without getting splitting headaches." I asked her all of my weird and seemingly silly questions, and she had all the right answers. She had been having unusual telephone problems and had also been receiving strange voices on her Citizens Band CB radio. "Tell me," she asked, "has anyone ever reported receiving visits from peculiar Air Force officers?" "I've heard a few stories about them," I said cautiously. "Well, last May 1967, a man came by here," and she continued. "She said he was Major Richard French, and he was interested in CB and UFOs. He was about 5'9" tall, with a kind of olive complexion and pointed face. His hair was dark and very long, too long for an Air Force officer. We thought he spoke perfect English. He was well educated. This man was nattily dressed in a gray suit, white shirt, and black tie. Everything he was wearing was braided. Oh, excuse me, it was brand new, excuse me, she observed. He drove a white Mustang, and her husband copied down the license number and had it checked out later. It proved to be a rented car from Minneapolis. He said his stomach was bothering him, she noted. I told him that what he needed was some Jell-O. He said if it kept bothering him, he would come back for some. Early the next morning, Major French drove up to the butler's house again. His stomach was still troubling him, so Mr. Butler sat him down at her kitchen table and slid a bowl of Jell-O in front of her. Did I say that right? His stomach was still troubling him, so Mrs. Butler sat him down at her kitchen table and slid a big bowl of Jell-O in front of him. Did you ever hear of anyone trying to drink Jell-O? She asked him. Well, that's what he did. He acted like he had never seen any before. He picked the bowl up and tried to drink it. I had to show him how to eat with a spoon. Major French didn't visit any of her friends, and it is something of a mystery why he singled the Butlers out. Later, she said this same man turned up in Forest City, Iowa, and dropped in on some close friends of the Butlers there. There proved to be a Richard Frank in the Air Force in Minnesota, but he didn't even remotely answer to the above description. The Butlers have reportedly experienced all kinds of poltergeist phenomena in their house since the UFO flap began in Owatonna in 1966. Objects have been moving about their own accord. Glass objects have suddenly and visibly shattered without cause. Strange noises have resounded throughout the house. On another occasion, she claimed that while she was standing outside watching some little flashers, she suddenly felt a cool, comforting hand on her shoulder. She looked around, but there was no one there. Sometimes I've seen some kind of activity, men moving around in the trees behind our house at night. This reminds me of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, right? Or something else that people are falsely labeling or as Sasquatch. Anyways, but something keeps me from going near them. No one around Owatonna reported any of the extensive UFO sightings to the Air Force. We're all disgusted with the government, Mrs. Butler declared. We know they just tell us it was all swamp gas. There were airship sightings in Owatonna in 1897 and in 1880. The home of a Mr. Dimmitt was, did I read that part right? Dimmitt? Maybe it was Dimmitt. Was plagued with poltergeist-like activity. Explosions of undermined, what the hell? Undetermined origin took place in his house. The doorbell rang frequently when no one was there, and so on. So perhaps this isolated little community of 14,000 is of some special interest to the mysterious ultra-terrestrials. Mrs. Butler's story may sound bizarre, but I have heard the same things too many times in too many different places to dismiss them lightly. In case after case I have heard about strange men who paid pointless visits and sometimes posed as Air Force officers. The descriptions are always the same: slight in stature, dark olive skin, sharp-pointed features. And most of these scattered witnesses specifically noticed that these men were dressed in clothes that seemed brand new. Even the soles of their shoes appeared to be unwalked on. If they have occasion to pull out a wallet or a notebook, that also is brand new. Most men, even Air Force officers, carry a beat-up old wallet. I have carefully kept many of these small details to myself and have never published them or discussed them. They provide a yardstick by which I can measure the validity of new stories. The sudden blinding headaches described by Mrs. Butler are also very common among participants who have been involved in close sightings or actual contacts. Finally, there is a curious experience of her friend who was seized by some kind of trance and parroted someone else's words. This, too, has happened far more frequently than one might imagine. But such stories rarely go very far because they are so weird and unbelievable. The phrase, "What is your cycle?" your time cycle, has special meaning to me. I had heard it before from other participants. In December 1967, Tom Monteleon, is that what it is? A young student in psychology, a psychology major in Philadelphia, Maryland, allegedly had a contact with a ground UFO and conversed with a man in shiny coveralls who identified himself as Vendig? I don't know how you pronounce that. It's Vadig. Vading. I'm going to call it Vading. Or Vading. Whatever, I'm going to call it Vading. A few weeks later, this same Vading appeared in a Washington restaurant where the student was working as a waiter. This time he dressed in conventional clothing and appeared to be a normal human being except for his bulging thyroid eyes. Altogether, the student met Mr. Vading 4 times, and each time he ended the conversation with the phrase, "I'll see you in time." Time is one of the most important aspects of the UFO phenomena. It plays a strange but significant role. Part of the answer to flying saucers may lie not in the stars, but in the clock ticking on your mantelpiece. Our world exists in 3 dimensions: height, width, and breadth. We can move in many directions within these dimensions: up, down, sideways, forward, and backwards. We measure space in relation to our own size by inches, feet, yards, miles, light years. If we were 25 feet tall and our plants were the size of Jupiter, many times larger than the Earth, I say plant, I say planet, were the size of Jupiter and many times larger than the Earth, we would undoubtedly have adjusted our measurements of space accordingly. Our inch might be equal to a Earth foot. Our mile might be equal to 10 Earth miles. Space does not exist except when we make it exist. To us, the distance between atoms and matter is so minute that it can only be calculated with hypothetical measurements. Yet, if we lived on an atom, our size was relative to its size beyond reach. The ant lives in a world of giants where even a blade of grass is a gigantic structure and a tree is a whole universe. If ants had measurements, their inch might be the size of a point of a pin. Their mile would be less than a foot. How dare we try to reduce the universe to our own terms? We can't even see or sense a large part of the world around us. Man is not perfect, and man is not the final perfect end product of evolution. He is the beginning. There is another man-made measurement called time. Unlike the other three dimensions, time has us trapped. We can move in only one dimension through it, forward. This forward motion is governed by physical laws. We can't leap ahead to the year 1984 any more than we can slide back to 1948. Very Orwellian right there. We are all trapped in this moment of time, this instance. The only way we can bridge time is to create something that will endure beyond the immediate moment. We can construct buildings, pyramids, works of art, and even laws which become material and lasting things. Our moments become seconds, minutes, hours, days, and years. Our lives revolve around clocks and calendars. Time becomes very real to us, and it's almost inconceivable that we could live without it. Yet time doesn't really exist at all. This moment exists to us. The same moment is being shared by other planets and other stars. Or is it? The light from the distant star may take 30 years to cross space and reach us. We can see a nova, exploding space, and reach us. Did I say that right? Well, light from a distant star may take 30 years to cross space and reach us. We can see a nova exploding 1,000 years after it actually burst and vanished. If our telescopes were strong enough, we could peer into the past. We could see that even 1,000 years after it had happened, perhaps we could see a planet near a star, or see a whole population panic and go mad as their suns started to expand and pour heat and radiation on them. Perhaps long after our own planet is a dead cinder, some dispassionate astronomer in some remote part of the universe will collect the light from this moment and watch us groveling about in this year. We had learned to measure time by observing special characteristics of our universe. Our days and nights are measured by the length and time it takes the Earth to rotate on its axis. Our years are the number of days it takes to make one complete circuit around the sun. Our lives are scaled by the number of years our delicate organisms can survive. If the Earth did not rotate, there would be no days. If it did not circle the sun, there would be no years. If we were larger, smaller, and lived on, I guess it's Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons. So it's Ganymede, if I said it right. Our whole measurement of time would be different. Assume that a planet exists trapped in a binary two-star system. Its orbit is such that all sides of the planet are constantly bathed in light. No day-night cycle exists there. The inhabitants have no way of measuring time, even by years. By our own standards, they could be living in a timeless void. The Pleiades actually contain more than 200 stars, although only 7 are visible to our naked eye, and many of them forming binary systems. As close as our astronomers can tell, those stars seem to be dying. In another few million years of our time, the Pleiades will be no more. For what we know about the Pleiades, the stars there seem to be swirling among great clouds of radiant gas. If they harbor any planetary systems, we wonder what effect those gases might have. An early contactee, Albert K. Bender, wrote a book containing so many far-out details that few ufologists took it seriously. He claimed that UFO entities told him that they lived underground on their home planet because periodically they pass through masses of deadly clouds which destroy life and create a great blackness. When Bender's account, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, was first published in 1962, it read like a fantasy of a madman. But now many of the things he described have repeatedly occurred all over the world, and the book deserves a careful reading. If flying saucers actually exist as extraterrestrial spaceships, then the Pleiades might deserve a place high on the list of possible origins. Am I saying it right? Since Pleiades deserve a place on the list of possible origins. It is possible that the ancients were so enthralled with the magical number of 7 that they placed undue emphasis upon the 7 sisters. But it is equally possible that they might have had access to some particular bit of knowledge which has since been lost. Flying saucer. I have seen things in the sky, but I can't say I've ever seen anything that quote is a flying saucer. But you never know. This Fortean place is, well, it's quite a shit show. We'll see what happens. Flying saucers and 3 men. Maybe we can find it as well. Maybe we can read it. There's a lot of books. I think I'm going to do this, even though no one's going to be interested. I'm going to drive a lot of people away from doing this, but I'm going to do this for my own learning and for my own development because it has to be done. For me, personally, I need it. So, those who listen, I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Anthropologists have been amazed to discover that the completely isolated tribes of South Africa and the Aborigines of Australia have much folklore about the Pleiades, and he even called the cluster of the 7 sisters just as the ancient Middle East and European cultures did. Much of this independent folklore contends that the Pleiades was the home of the Sky People. North American Indian tribes have similar legends about the Pleiades, and of all the stars and constellations named and known by the ancient peoples, it is interesting to note that even the Bible singles out the seven sisters repeatedly. In the book of Job, chapter 38, 31, we find this enigmatic statement: "Canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades, or loose the hands of Orion?" In modern UFO contact lore, beginning in the early 1950s, the constellation of Orion is frequently cited as the home of evil spacemen who are planning to take over the Earth. A famous British contactee, Arthur Bryant, claimed that on April 24th, 1965, a UFO occupant informed him that forces from Epsilon are already here in the form of poltergeists. Epsilon, did I say what? So forces from Epsilon. Why did I say that wrong? Because I got MS. Forces from Epsilon are already here in the form of poltergeists. Epsilon Orionis is the central star in the belt of Orion. The Bible and many other ancient works seem to imply that Orion harbors a malevolent force, while Pleiades is the home of the good guys. Then it says here, the earth too has passed through clouds of blackness according to ancient traditions. 3 days of total darkness during which no light or fire could be seen. Describing in the Book of Mormon. Oh, well, that's not even worth anything. That's total garbage. Sorry if I offend anybody, but I used to be a Mormon. That book is total garbage. Total fiction. It proves one thing, that anybody can have an encounter with these entities and end up, if they're clever enough, write their own holy text called the Book of Mormon. It's so they literally plagiarize chapters out of Isaiah and verses out of the New Testament, and it's claimed to be in some ancient I can't remember what kind of Reformed Egyptian, where the only person who ever was able to read it was Joseph Smith, according to him, and his little magic hat and stones. The problem is, those plates that they said that they have never been found since. No one's ever seen it except for a group of people that were close to him, like maybe they're working together to start a new cult or religion. Maybe they were even encouraged by certain people in the burned over district in New York. And I just would say, be careful what you fucking read. Make sure you know where the sources are. It claims to be this Reformed Egyptian, but it literally is quoting verses from the King James Bible. That can't be. Linguistically, that cannot be. Here, a lot of the cities in the Book of Mormon come from towns and names in New York, in the burnt over area. It's just, that's the reason I ended up leaving the church. I had 2 months left of my mission, and I realized I was in a situation that was no better than some corrupt Fortune 500 company, right? I might as well be there. At least I'd get something out of it. Then I left. And believe me, I found out real fast how close that community of Mormons in my life were. I grew up a Mormon from the age I was 8 till I had 2 months left of my mission. That means I served almost 2 years. There's a lot of things that I ended up not completing in my life when I found out that I was, in another scam. Now, a lot of people I know would finish it, and maybe I should have. They put it on my resume, right? Because, by the way, if you're a Mormon and you serve a mission, and maybe you end up being a zone leader or something like that, or the big shot hanging out with the mission president. You can use that resume. You can use that to go to the BYU and get scholarships. You end up being, you can be a big shot in your ward, which, by the way, isn't it interesting? They call their churches wards, like they're in a prison. Sketching time. Did I say sketching? I mean stretching time. So this next part. Much has been written about the fact that astronauts whizzing through space at 25,000 miles per hour return to Earth at the fraction of a second younger than the rest of us. This is because Einstein discovered that the faster a particle moves through space, the slower it moves through time. Time becomes a hypothetical field. Trapped here on Earth, we all move through that field at the same rate. Science fiction writers have always made a big deal out of this, and there are endless tales of astronauts dashing off to other planets and upon returning to Earth, finding that hundreds of years have actually passed, even though they are only months or years older. Physicists following Einstein's concepts assert that nothing can exceed the speed of light without becoming infinite mass, and being reduced to energy. Or infinite, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, however, if we want to blow our minds altogether, we can speculate that energy particles might hit such a high frequency and move so fast that it doesn't move at all. Energies beyond the cosmic rays on our spectrum scale would have such a high frequency that they would appear to be motionless. A small group of American physicists are now actually trying to build the equipment necessary to test this possibility. Now remember, this book is 50 years old. It's still relevant today in many ways. These super high frequencies would be far outside our time field, yet they could coexist all around us. We have no way of detecting or defining them. We could only guess at their existence, just as men guess for hundreds of years about atomic structure. Did I say that right? 100 years about the atomic structure before we developed the technology needed to confirm the theories. To repeat this another way, if an astronaut could move more slowly through the time field by accelerating through three-dimensional space, then it might be possible for a super high frequency particle moving at the super high speed to exceed or be uninfluenced, to escape, not exceed. So, okay, let's see. Fuck. I'll just read the whole thing in. To repeat this another way, if an astronaut can move more slowly through the time field by accelerating through three-dimensional space. Wow, has it been that long? Okay. Damn. To repeat this another way, if an astronaut can move more slowly through the time field by accelerating through three-dimensional space, then it might be possible for a super high frequency particle moving at super high speeds to escape or be uninfluenced by our time field altogether. What I'm trying to do here is reduce the complex Einstein theory to the simplest of terms. Now then, how can all of this be applied to the UFO phenomenon? Throughout this book, I have tried to explain that the UFOs seem to be transmogrifications. I can't say anything right. Transmogrifications, seemingly material apparitions which might actually be composed of energy from the high reaches of the electromagnetic spectrum. If this is so, then one additional factor is necessary: order or intelligence. The UFO phenomenon does seem to be controlled. It does follow intelligent patterns. If the objects themselves are manifestations of higher energies, then something has to manipulate those energies somehow and reduce them to the visible frequency. Not only do they enter the visible frequency, but they take form which seems physical and real to us. And I believe Bigfoot does this as well, from my experience and what I've seen in my encounters. And they carry out actions which seem intelligent. Thus, we arrive at the source. The source has to be a form of intelligent energy operating at a very highest possible point of the frequency spectrum. If such an energy exists at all, it might permeate the universe and maintain equal control over each component part. Because of its very high frequency, so high that the energy particles are virtually standing still, the source has no need to replenish itself in any way that would be acceptable to our environmental sciences. It could actually create and destroy matter by manipulating the lower energies. It would be timeless because it exists beyond all time fields. It would be infinite because it is not confined by three-dimensional space. Within these energy structures, there could be other masses of intelligent energy existing on slightly lower frequencies. While these masses would be ultimately under the control of the highest intelligence, they might maintain a certain amount of independence and be able to manipulate the lower energies on their own. But no matter what activities they might engage in, they would be obligated to fit their actions into a plan of the overall intelligence. A computer relies upon systems which store and direct the course of electrical impulses. A complex system of switches and transistors which act like switches for the circuitry, which break down the information into simple negative and positive pulses. Cyberneticians work with a system of numbers, zeros for negative and 1 for positive. A problem is fed into a computer and the answer comes back in these numbers. 1010, for example, means 10. These are 10, I guess. 1040, for example, means 10. Or 10, I guess. I guess it would be 10. These are known as binary numbers. The human brain functions in much the same way. Billions of tiny switches known as synapses are built into complex circuitry of nerves. If you handle and smell a rose and prick your finger on one of its thorns, the memory of this event is stored in your brain circuitry by the opening and closing of billions of these synapses. The memory of of the odor takes millions, and as does the memory of the pain of the thorn, and millions of points of light which were fed from your eyes to your brain, and which registered the beauty of the rose. Other circuits form a kind of index so that you can instantly tune in to this one particular memory bank and remember the rose clearly. The brains of small children are filled largely with sensual information. As we grow older, our minds become cluttered with millions of impressions and experiences, and with fragments of all that we read, see, and hear. The child's mind, especially before the so-called age of reason, when the logic circuits begin to form, is therefore a clear instrument, open and uninfluenced by opinions and conclusions. This is an important point in our UFO mystery. Our computers and brains are complicated devices developed to cope with the barrage of sensual data from the material world around us. Perhaps if we were in a pure energy state, each particle of energy could serve as a synopsis, and information could be stored by a slight alteration in frequency. Thus, all our memory fragments of the rose would be recorded at one frequency, and the whole energy form could tune into that memory at will by adjusting frequencies as we adjust a radio receiver. In other words, no complex circuitry could be required. Nobody would be necessary, like our physical body. The energy patterns would not need a material form to augment it, circulate food, etc. If the energy from form were infinite, timeless, and permeated the entire universe, it would have total knowledge and total awareness. It would not need eyes, ears, and nerve endings to precipitate. For perception. Excuse me, that's not precipitate. Okay, let's try this again. My God. If energy form was infinite, timeless, and permeated the entire universe, it would have total knowledge and total awareness. It would not need eyes, ears, and nerve endings for perception. Like Mount Everest, it would be there and would be unaffected by whatever was happening lower on the energy spectrum. It could surround you completely at this very moment and be totally aware of all the feeble pulses of low energy passing through your brain. If it is so desired, it could control those pulses, thus control your thoughts. Man has always been aware of this intelligent energy or force. He has always worshipped it. Interesting. The modus operandi of prophecies. The modus operandi of prophecy. Our first conclusion is that the UFO originated from beyond our own time frame or time cycle. Our second conclusion is that the source has total foreknowledge of human events and even the individual lives. Since time and space are not absolutes, although they seem to be to us, these two conclusions are compatible. Visualize a teenage boy with a microscope. He is studying a tiny microbe with a total lifespan of 60 seconds. He takes a fine needle and pokes into the liquid environment of the microbe. A drop of water on a slide which seems limitless to the minute creature. Suppose that microbe has some sort of visual or sensory apparatus. The point of the needle would suddenly appear enigmatically before it, a totally foreign object beyond the microbe's experience and frame of reference. The bewildered microbe swims around the object, studying it, then sits down and writes a microbe report on the unexplained object which he saw. When the boy withdraws the needle, the object suddenly disappears in front of the microbe because it is no longer part of his environment or his time cycle. 5 minutes later, by the boy's clock, he reinserts the needle into the same drop of water. Now many generations of microbes have passed. A new microbe glimpses with wonder and hurries to the microbe laboratory and uncovers the old report. Strange foreign objects made out of an unknown material and behaving in a most peculiar way had been seen in ancient times. The microbe learns to the boy the two events spanned a mere 5 minutes. To the microbe, many generations have passed. By our time cycle, the two events were almost simultaneous. We'll switch things around a bit. Now we are the microbes. Could it be possible that all UFO events are interrelated, and although they are widely separated according to our time cycle, they might really all be simultaneously events to the UFO nuts? I don't mean to imply that some giant is poking needles at us. The microbes world is a tiny, almost insignificant part of the boy's world. Although the microbe had absolutely no knowledge of it, the microbe was not only unaware of the boy's existence, but could not have possibly comprehended his existence. It may be that all human events occur simultaneously when viewed by a greater intelligence. The boy peering through the microscope can plainly see the microscopic obstacle looming up in front of the microbe seconds before before it even becomes aware of the obstacle. He can thus predict in a limited way the microbe's future. In a single minute of Earth time, he can watch the birth, growth, and reproduction and death of the microbe. The event is interesting to the boy, but not especially important. He can watch a larger predatory microbe swim towards his specimen and consume it. If he wished, he could poke his needle into the drop again and maybe force the predator out of the way, thus saving the microbe's life. He can manipulate the microbe in many ways, but he cannot communicate with it. If a giant superintelligence wants or needs to communicate with a much lower form, all kinds of problems are presented. The communication must be conducted in a manner which will be meaningful and understandable to the lower life forms. An unacceptable frame of reference must be found and utilized. The superintelligence may wish to convey information of a very complex nature, so complex that it's beyond the comprehension of the lower form. The only way to accomplish this is to pass the information on a very small in very small fragments over many generations using many modes of communication. All of this might take only a few seconds of the superintelligence time, but would cover thousands of years of the lower forms time cycle. A long chain of events would be required for such communication. They would have to be arranged in such a manner that they assume singular importance to the generation involved and would be carefully recorded and preserved for succeeding generations. At the end of the chain of assorted fragments would form a whole which would produce the information in toto. Call it a revelation or an awakening, if you will. UFO events seem to occur century after century in the same geographical location. A majority of these events took place on Wednesdays and Saturdays and were concentrated around the hours of 6 to 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. And these facts in themselves are proof that the phenomenon is guided by an intelligence and that the individual events form part of a larger plan. As we progress step by step along with bizarre cosmic trails, that plan becomes slowly more plain. We have misunderstood much of the material passed on to us. We are just beginning to comprehend the full meaning of the many manifestations of the energies from the higher frequencies. The UFO phenomena is frequently reflective, that is, the observed manifestations seem to be deliberately tailored and adjusted to the individual beliefs and mental attitudes of the witnesses. Both the objects and their occupants appear to be able to adopt a multitude of forms, and the contactees are usually given information which conforms to their own beliefs. UFO researchers who concentrate on one particular aspect or theory find themselves inundated with seemingly reliable reports which tend to substantiate that theory. My own extensive experience with this reflective factor have led me to carry out weird experiments which confirm that a large part of the reported data is engineered and deliberately false. The witnesses are not the perpetrators of these hoaxes, but are merely the victims. The apparent purpose of all this false data are a multitude. Much of it is meant to create confusion and diversion. Some of it has served to support certain beliefs which were erroneous, but which would serve as stepping stones to the higher, more complex truth. Whole generations have come and gone happily believing in the false data, unaware that they were really mere links in the chain. If we understood it all too soon, we might crumble under the weight of the truth. It was first necessary to build man's ego, to make him believe that he had some worth in the cosmic whole. So lies containing veiled truth were spread among us. Events were staged to make those lies seem valid. Many men, brilliant scholars and philosophers, have clearly seen the truth for centuries. Libraries all over the world are filled with books detailing their findings, but their truths were lost in the waves of organized belief. This earth is covered with windows into the other unseen world. Perhaps if we had the instruments to detect them, we would find that these windows are focal points for super higher frequency waves, the rays of ancient lore. These rays might come from Orion or from the Pleiades, as the ancients claimed, or they might be part of the greater force of eminence throughout the universe. The UFOs have given us evidence that such rays exist. Now slowly we are being told why. And that is the end of chapter 10. Chapter 10, which is, chapter 10, which, what is your time cycle? The book is Why UFOs Operation Trojan Horse, John A. Keel. And I think he was onto something, and for some reason no one else seemed to gravitate to it, unless what he just had told us is the reason that this construct they live in is based on a big fucking scam, a big lie, and they need to keep on lying to us, and they want people and they reward people to perpetrate the lies. And if you get honest and you be truthful about things, and you get to a point when you realize you don't know shit, it becomes a problem for them. And if you stop agreeing to the scam, it becomes a problem for them. That possibly really are in a reincarnation soul trap matrix. That's a possibility, isn't it? A grand illusion.